Okay. Well, I must say that final session certainly didn't disappoint. That was extremely engaging. Peter, I share your thoughts about the future and the fact that we've kind of given up on the future as an idea because it looks something like a Hollywood disaster movie. And I mean, I recognize that nostalgia is the kind of sickness of my generation, in a way, that it's in everything from our fashion to our love of Instagram, so that every photograph has to look like kind of the 1970s. And I think it is, you know, a product of fear. And I think, as I said, some of that fear is like about ecological disaster. Some of it, Caterina, is about the kind of stuff you're talking about, like designing humans, which frankly is something that a lot of us don't really want to think about. On the other hand, I don't know. I mean, I'm feeling my way to a question for you here, Peter. It's something about what the future looks like to you, because there's some of those projections felt kind of quite 90s to me. Do you know what I mean? Like the kind of whole print plus thing. It feels a bit like the kind of encyclopedia with a CD-ROM in the back. And but they're products of their time. And you know, in the 90s, everyone thought we'd be using video phones, and instead what happened is we started texting, which is the most kind of prosaic form of technology you can possibly imagine. And so the future is always a surprise to us. And you know better than most of us what kind of counterintuitive surprise might be around the corner next.
If I did, I wouldn't tell you, and I'd just invest in it. But no one knows. And I would actually say that one of the things that about the future is that it's so odd that we're so afraid right now. You know, you should have been afraid in the 20th century. That was a terrifying century. And
well, I think we were actually. I think
the
atomic bomb was upon us.
But before that, in the 20s, I mean, that was all coming, and so a lot of these ideas about space and things, you know, came in the first half of their century, as we are in the first half of our century right now. And I just think that one of the things is we might become somewhat timid, and partially because we figured out how to destroy ourselves completely. But you know, we've done okay. We haven't yet, and I just think that there's a desire to commodify every new advance. There is a kind of terror about not being a part of something that fits into an economy, and these are reasonable terrors for people who take on vast amounts of debt to be trained, right? Which I did not, and it breaks my heart. And actually, I left one institution because I couldn't. I had a student who came to me and mentioned just casually, "Oh yeah, I'm 180,000 in now," and I left. I just said I cannot work at this institution anymore. It just costs too much money. And I think that these are the things that do close things off. I'm interested in the notion less of vectoral avant-garde movements, because those don't exist anymore, and much more in a kind of metaphor of tide pools, where waves roll in and then leave something behind. And I think that if there's one thing that I really enjoyed about today, it was an exact reminder that when I tell my students that you know, you have to be paying as much attention to what's happening in Shanghai as you do in New York, that you have to pay as much attention to what's happening in Thailand as you do in France, that you have to be looking at what's emerging in Africa and Latin America, and that you have the tools by which to do that. I think the very migrating of fashion that we've seen and that instantaneity, and I mean, I think that one of the things we're going to burn out on is the archive, and I can't wait for that. Right, I appreciate the remix, but I also want to see us 19th iterations of punk bore the hell out of me. I'm just not that interested in them, and I'd like to see someone break through that. You just keep watching, and generally, it's not going to be something I know about or that's aimed at me. That's part of the generational issue of where the future comes from. So I'm aware of that.
Do you think that the sustainability agenda is in some way holding us back, in the sense that okay, now we are actually talking about Mars. But for a long time there, we weren't thinking about how to get to the moon again. That was a very, we were thinking about how to make things that look like, cardboard and wood, and it's kind of almost, it's almost a kind of nostalgia for craft. I mean, I would say that Lynda, in your, this has nothing to do with sustainability actually, but it is about nostalgia. Your kind of skewering of the New York surf scene, which was so kind of spot on, it really is about nostalgia. Like, in a way, all that beautiful graphic design was so nostalgic, actually, and that artisanal hair wax is nostalgic,
Yes.
and those wooden shops are nostalgic. I've just mixed up two questions, I realize. Let me start with the first one. Sustainability, is our fear of destroying the planet part of the problem?
It may be, which makes me even worse of a person than I think I am, because I don't talk about sustainability that much. I see that as a kind of given. I did a book, one of the books with in the Mediawork series was Shaping Things with Bruce Sterling, and he has a wonderful line. He says, "No one is so green as the dead," and and that basically the sustainability issue is really designing our way out of the problems we designed our way into. And I do have confidence that we will be doing that. Maybe it's misplaced confidence, but I also feel that we cannot have the default setting be fear. And I think that one can move, if it's fear or hyper-consumerism, yeah, then we're really in trouble.
Caterina, since we're on the topic of the future, you were very clear in a way. Well, you were quite critical of a lot of this art and design, which is about bioengineering and excuse me, bioprinting, and you seemed to suggest that the way out of that that kind of impasse that some of those artists have got themselves into, in a way, or the way out of the kind of ethical dilemmas, is to make all of those works lean more towards kind of productivity, towards kind of practical functions, like working with medical science, and being less kind of speculative and artistic about it. Am I right?
Yes, you're totally right. Yeah, I really like the idea of being critical designs, but they have to be based on reality mostly. Then they can be fictional, but they have to be they have to have a strong basement of reality and facts and ethical implications, and not just be, oh, this is so cool. Biodesign right now, it's established and it's a very trendy, I feel, field. So.
But it's interesting, because to me that's quite, that sounds like modernist ideology, again, repeating itself, first as tragedy perhaps, and secondly as farce, as Marx put it. The idea that you can only, that bioengineering that function has to follow form, you know what I mean? Doesn't that feel kind of, in a way, perhaps slightly outdated, or perhaps it's just, perhaps that's just practical and useful?
Well, I'm not saying that they have to be practical only. They should maybe just being critical. I don't like really to use the word speculative, so I use critical. But they should talk like questioning real things, not just like touch on little things, because it's about human beings and it's about us, the human body. It's they are touching on.
No, I think you're right, actually, in a way, because, on one level, because a lot of, some of those kind of designers feel it's a weakness when their work is seen as art, because actually the kind of ethical implications of that work is very easy to write off by, for instance, the media and the press. If they say, oh, it's just art, it's never going to happen, it's not going to affect us, whereas actually when it starts to impinge on real medical science, then everybody gets excited / nervous,
Yeah, and I also feel that design institutions or design museums or the design field in general don't really support these projects, and that's a big problem also, because mostly these projects are very expensive to produce, even if they are just speculative. Like, for example, the Revital Cohen project took 2 years to be produced. And of course, like art institution, art galleries are very interested in these kind of works, and they are funding these projects. So there is a little bit of conflict in between what is what. So that's why I'm trying to push more for really fund these projects into reality and make them more visible. But if they really matter, like if they are really like good quality, they really like question good things, or maybe the design field will recognize them and say, all right, we will support them. And
Lynda, I want to bring you in, and I mean, I really enjoyed your presentation, and I liked the way you said you invoked extreme sports, and you said all of these logos are kind of they're borrowing the language of extreme sports, and I'm really fascinated by extreme sports because I think there's a real tie-in between the extremity of those, in a way, this idea of performance, of us as performers, and I think product design went really down the route of hyper-performance, and sport went down the route of hyper-performance, that we have to somehow distinguish ourselves as individuals, and we have to, like, energy drinks are the perfect commodification of this idea that we have to kind of perform all the time. We can never be lazy, we have to kind of excel. And I'm wondering if there is something, I'm looking for something kind of futuristic in your idea, because it was almost more like you were critiquing a kind of nostalgia, but I'm wondering, well, what's your proposal then? How are you going to, how should surf culture embrace the future?
Well, I think what I did say is that what is happening here in New York is really, it's just pretentious, because, when you are speaking about something that is such a physical activity, such as surfing, there is an aspect of enthusiasm, there's an aspect of emotion that goes along with it. And in order to sort of elevate this and make it into an art form, all of the emotion is being completely drained out of it. I don't think that necessarily the extreme sport, that all the design of extreme sports is the solution, but what I'm advocating for is a much more sort of truthful middle ground that would be much more representative of the reality. And I do think it's a trend to sort of not express enthusiasm, because that seems to be much more of a riskier proposition. It's so easy to be cynical.
But I mean, the Americans invented cool and as a concept, and the definition of cool in a way was not to show enthusiasm, wasn't it? It was like, or maybe that's the Parisian definition of cool, I don't know. But I think there's something about that New York scene which is so painfully tasteful. Do you know what I mean? Like so kind of, these kind of cappuccino drinking aesthetes, pretending to be, athletes in
Everything
a way.
has been aestheticized.
Yeah. So that is an interesting point that's an interesting point to discuss, the kind of over-aestheticization of every aspect of culture, and as you would say, Peter, it's kind of commodification. Everything has to, the only things that succeed or that are allowed to succeed are the things that are easily commodified. Anyone want to pick up on that idea?
Well, yeah, I mean, I absolutely really appreciated your piece on New York surf culture, because I just discovered it by walking into Saturdays a couple of years ago and just like going, wow, look, lots of books.
By a pomade?
No, not enough hair. But what is interesting about that is that it reifies, ancient ideas about what New York is versus what other places are, especially California, and it's very self-referential and self-satisfied. And I think that that kind of commodity design is something, again, one of my great worries about the future of interaction design is that all of interaction design, as we move from tablets to phones, is essentially going to bring us to two buttons, and one button says buy now, and the other button says buy later, and that. Earlier we were talking about the difference between an Alexander McQueen show and a Jeff Koons show. And one thing I would say is that, Alexander McQueen has other places to show. Jeff Koons only has the museum. And it does make me wonder about the elasticity of the museum as a showcase for all of our commodity culture. But on the other hand, when I see it done as M+ seems to be doing it, I'm really interested in what 21st century presentation of our visual tactile and oral cultures are going to be. It's really impossible for me in wandering, I'm from LA, I got in when it was raining and then it was sunny. And I've got to say that when it was sunny yesterday and I was walking through a lot of downtown New York, I kept wondering, is it possible to run an economy without hyper-consumerism? We just saw what happens when you don't have hyper-consumerism, and it was a worldwide economic debacle. So I have, Thomas Piketty. If Thomas Piketty can't give you a solution about that, I can't. But it's certainly something we all have to think about. And new models of economics, as Brenda Laurel always says, design content depends on economic frameworks. And I think that, we can't, the original name for graphic design is commercial art. So we can't forget that. And I think that it's really important to keep all of these things, as we did, I think, in really interesting ways today, in a kind of, conversation, of which I have no answer at this point.
I fear it's going to be very difficult to come up with an answer. Perhaps we should, that felt like a very rounded and poignant place to end. Alice, how are we doing time-wise? I'm a terrible moderator. Okay, great. Yes, you need to do some housekeeping, don't you?